welcome to another episode of They Called Him Yeshua. And today we are here with someone who needs no introduction. Is someone that I admire greatly, a world-renowned, and some would say the voice of Messianic Judaism, Paul Wilbur. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today. Of course. Really appreciate you being here.
A pleasure.
Yeah. So, Paul, today we're talking about where we've come from, and I want to hear your testimony. Where did this all start for you? So I want to take a trip in the Wayback Machine and go to your childhood. What was Jewish identity and culture in your home growing up?
It was anywhere from intense to hidden to rejected to anything but. My dad grew up in a very anti-Semitic neighborhood outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Born in 1923, so went through the Great Depression years and lots of anti-Semitism. Lost his sister because of it, with the rocks and the names and the depression and all the rest. So my dad grew up really, can I say, not appreciating where he had come from. Spent his entire life pushing away because of the hurt and the pain. And so when I embraced all of this after being born again in 1977, his comment to me was, "Why are you doing this to me?" He took my salvation story combined with the music that he launched in my life at age 9 by putting a inexpensive Sears and Roebuck guitar in my hands, a Sears Silvertone, which I think was like $19 out of the huge black and white catalog. He took it very personally because of my faith and then my walk that really, for the first time, embraced our Judaism as a family. It was really painful for him. And we didn't speak much after that. But on the way back, my mom, who we thought had no real Jewish background at all, on a journey to Auschwitz several years ago, found a whole page of her, turns out, German Jewish maiden name, Lorman, which means laughter, or court jester, which may explain some of...
And now we know. Now we know the rest of the
story. A whole
story.
page of her maiden name. She had already graduated off the planet, so I didn't get a chance, but checking with an Orthodox rabbi who loves to do name historically and all, said, yes, this is a German Jewish name. It just came from Germany. Anyway, I tend to go astray with bunny trails and details that are interesting to me. So, but Mom was really the one who instilled a love for Israel and things Jewish in us, while Dad was way off in the weeds somewhere about the whole thing.
Interesting.
But music from the age of 9, my dad wanted to be a violinist. He was very accomplished violinist, nice Jewish boy, and wanted to be a professional musician. So at the age of 9, he put a guitar in my hands. He played a rudimentary C scale on his violin and told me, hunt and peck.
Wow.
What does it sound like? Find it. It's somewhere in these strings. He said, I don't know where. Find that one. And that was my first guitar lesson, which he was very passionate to instill in me and then to foster as I grew. Gave me lessons with a real teacher and was very proud of my musical accomplishments.
So what did I have another question that I'm going to put off a little bit here because I want to ask this cultural question. As you were talking about your father's relationship to Judaism, going through the World War II era and the Holocaust era, there was a movie that I love with, I know Marlon Brando played a defecting German officer, and I believe Dean Martin played in it, and I can't remember who the third person was. It was called Young Lions. Do you remember this movie?
Okay.
Yeah, the Young
Small
Lions.
bell.
Yeah.
Ding,
yeah.
ding.
And in that story, there was a Jewish American officer who was in the army, and he experienced anti-Semitic hatred from the people in his own company. This is all your fault. The reason that we're here is because of you, And I find it fascinating that in the 50s that was part of a film about World War II. What do you think the Jewish-American relationship to its biblical identity was for your parents that you grew up in? Was there an embracing of Judaism biblically, or was it strictly a cultural thing?
That's a really good question. Because, at least on my dad's side, there was a real lack of a scriptural, historical, although my grandmother was raised ultra-Orthodox in Brooklyn. Her parents came from Russia, and she spoke Yiddish and baked all the strange foods that took on American names, but we found out, well, that's really Hamantash. No, she said, this is our date-filled cookies that were in the shape of a triangle, that were our favorites, but she didn't call them by those names. So I don't think there was a strong religious identity or at all. Although Dad served, he joined the Army Air Corps. Okay. We had no Air Force back in those days. And he joined and he flew 35 missions over Nazi Germany in a B-17. When you signed up, you signed up and you promised to do 25 missions. This is during the years when 9 out of 10 of those planes never came back. The famous B-17 was developed during those war years to carry bomb loads. So very thin hulls, bullets and shrapnel went through them like a warm knife through butter. And we lost a lot of our boys and girls in that. Dad joined the Bloody 100th, which was Doolittle's troop that bombed Tokyo soon after the Pearl Harbor thing. And they called it the Bloody 100th because 9 out of 10 ships never came back, ships meaning the planes. But he did 25 missions, and then he signed up for another 10, because during those years there was great success of getting through the Luftwaffe. We had now developed a P-32 or P-36 fighter plane that was equal to what the Germans were destroying our planes with. And so there was good cover. A lot more of the bombing routes were getting through. And he signed up for 10 more because of what was happening on the ground. I remember him telling one story. He didn't talk about it much until the very last couple of years of his life. But they were issued a sidearm, all the guys that flew. I think it was a .45, and he carried it with one bullet in it. And he told my mom, they were almost engaged during those years. He was trying to make up his mind. My mom and another girl, he chose wisely. And he told her, look, I've got one bullet in here. If the plane goes down, it's not for it's for me, because I know what happens to Jews, we know what's happening on the ground, and there's just no way I'm going to be taken. He lived with this his whole life. And towards the end, he actually got born again. He got baptized.
Wow.
He called me. He said, I want to get baptized. I want to be dunked. That was his words. He said, I want to do this right. And he asked if I knew any place in Pompton Plains, New Jersey, where we had grown up right outside of Wayne, a big metropolitan area. And so he found a place, and things changed for him. He apologized. Oh boy, it gets really emotional.
Yeah.
He apologized for his responses to me in my salvation, in my walk, in my embracing of our Jewish identity and what that means to us as not only as believers, but as people in culture and our purpose. And so, yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So, the home that you grew up in, from his side, was pretty divorced from those things that were biblically Jewish, culturally Jewish through your mom especially. How did you relate to your Judaism then as, let's say, a teenager?
Seemed like it was always on the flip side.
Okay.
My first job was working at a nursery with the plants and trimming trees and whatnot. The owner happened to be a Dutchman with a very thick accent, direct from Holland. And I worked for him for a year and a half, really worked hard, and I thought he really liked me. And one day I walked onto the job. I had got a couple of my other friends from high school jobs at the nursery. He needed more help. I walked on the job and he said to me, yeah, Wilbur, we're going to give you a vacation permanently. I said, what in the world? It was 7 o'clock in the morning. My mom had just dropped me off. Found out some of the guys had told him for some reason, Paul's a Jew. And so I lost my first job because of being a Jew. I was denied service at a public fast food restaurant. I walked in with another Jewish believer, and we were told, you're not welcome here. It was very strange.
That's interesting.
Very strange to me. So, but my first real good experience was in college. Went to Baldwin Wallace College outside of Cleveland, Ohio, to do a bachelor's degree in music education, majoring in voice. I didn't know how you chose your teachers. It turns out the teachers chose you. I didn't choose you, you chose me. Kind of the reverse of what Yeshua said. See what I did there?
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, okay. So we audition on the first day. Teachers line up in an auditorium, and they choose the students that they want. Turns out the teacher, who I know none of them, who chose me was the cantor at the temple downtown Cleveland, a very prestigious Reformed temple, the temple, right across the street from Marty Getz at Temple on the Heights.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Wow.
that was conservative. The same temple that Barry Siegel attended.
Oh my gosh.
In Cleveland, and Jerry Miller, Rabbi Jerry Miller.
Wow.
We were all right there in that little enclave, didn't know each other, never had any contact. But soon after joining the studio there, Cantor Smith said, I'd like you to join me at the temple. Okay. So this was my real first Jewish expression, understand, and I loved it.
Mm.
I sat next to him in the choir, the temple choir. Our temple band was members of the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. I mean, this was music on a very high level. The choir director was the principal organist in the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra, wrote all of our music, and it was an exceptional experience. Because of that and my training, I determined that the rest of my life I would spend as a traditional Orthodox cantor and an opera singer, like Richard Tucker, who had become a role model for me. I won't say idol, but a role model. A Jewish guy who actually did sing there at the temple for special services and operate on a very high level. So as a result of that really good first experience, I really embraced who I was and set my course for life until.
So then that brings us to the until. Briefly tell us your salvation experience. How did you come to faith in Yeshua?
So after 4 years of school, I packed a steamer trunk and moved to Italy. I wanted to study voice, opera, Italian. Took a room in an apartment with an 86-year-old Italian grandmother who spoke no English. I spoke no Italian. It was quite an experience. Studied there for nearly a year. Came back, taught high school music back in Berea, Ohio again for 2 years, choral music and guitar classes. And then I decided I'm off to graduate school to further my career. Well, up until that point, I was on a mission. I wanted to study voice and get to a very high level, and Italian and opera and religious Jewish music. And it seemed like every place I landed, there was a pretty blonde inviting me to church. It was like, I think I felt like I was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Please take me to church." Because it seemed like every girl that I was interested in went to church. And if that relationship was going to go anywhere, I had to go to church. So the same thing happened at grad school. I went to Indiana University to do a master's degree, chose an accompanist from the other master's students. It's a whole system that they have worked out for vocal students. And one of the first things she asked me, I picked her because she was pretty. If you were in the master's degree piano program at Indiana University, probably the #1 music school in the world for year after year after year because of their staff, they can all play piano. So it might as well be a nice experience, right? So that was my attitude. So I'll pick you. And one of the first things she said is, "Would you like to go to church?" And I said, "Of course." It's a setup. But I knew what to experience, right? It's 55, 58 minutes. There's numbers on the wall. They relate to a book in a pew behind you, in front of you. And there's a regular routine. Well, this was also a setup. The whole thing, there was no church building. This was a new startup in a junior high auditorium. No numbers on the wall. Very uncharacteristic for what I expected. And some guy who was a guest that morning got up and played special music. I have always been keyed into sound. Music and sound is what moved me. And I chose this course of my life because I wanted others to be moved by sounds that I could make. That was my motivation. And so but I didn't expect my response. This guy got up with a nylon string guitar. I knew what to expect. It's not going to be very good. It's not rehearsed. The guitar may or may not be in tune. And it'll be about 4 minutes, so just hold on to
Right.
It'll be over soon.
Grin and bear it.
Just like the service. This will be over soon, and you get a date with the pretty blonde. But this guy made a sound that really moved me. And I realized that he wasn't singing about God, which I had done for years, but he was singing to him. And it seemed to me, right or wrong, turned out to be right, that this guy actually knows God, which I'd heard about but never experienced. And so I kind of went on a quest. I want to meet this guy. Well, it turned out this was Bloomington, Indiana. He was a guest from Florida. He was interviewing for a position at this new church, which was already well attended, hundreds of people. And next couple weeks, I went back on Sunday nights trying to find this guy because they had a 45-minute Bible study on the minor prophets,
Okay.
whoever they are. I heard names like Habakkuk, what is that? You know, and these got minor prophets. So I was curious, but I wanted to meet this guy. Didn't happen. And I'd ask around, where's this guy who, I think I said, changed the atmosphere when he sang? That's all I knew. I didn't know about anointing and presence and all this stuff. And so I was naively asking, I want to meet the guy who made a sound that impacted my life for those few minutes. Couldn't find him. So one of these Sunday nights, months later, the announcement happens on a Sunday night, if you'd like a free meal. I'm putting myself through graduate school, paying the bills myself, working jobs, free meal. Sunday nights, the cafeteria in the grad dorm is closed. So it's Burger King or whatever, you know, a 2-for-1 special. Sign this attendance roster, circle your name. I said, I'm in. I signed my name, I circled it. They called me during the week and said, we've paired you up with a church family. You'll go there at 4 o'clock next Sunday. They'll give you a free meal, then they'll bring you to the service, 45 minutes, painless, you go home. I said, I'm in. So I got the address, I show up at this apartment, not a house. I'm picturing Grandma and Grandpa Jones,
Right.
who are going to treat me to 2 hours of pictures of their grandchildren, which I now do to other people, just to pay off. And then I get a free meal, go to church, grin and bear it, it'll be over. I knocked on the door, and who opens the door? The guy who had been sitting on the platform playing the sound. I about fell over. I was so taken, I just didn't even know what to do. This guy opens the door, he's originally from West Texas, with this great big grin and, hey brother, this big West Texas accent, you know, I'm still speaking Boston English, you know, proper English.
Right.
And he's speaking West Texas whatever, and we needed a translator to communicate, but I started to feel like something has been set in motion here. I interviewed him, I wanted to hear, turns out he did go to music school, he was trained, blah, 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 spent years as a music missionary, and now he was here at this church as a youth pastor, who nobody knew. And a couple weeks later, he invited me to go on a fishing trip to Bumpus Mills, Tennessee.
Okay.
Population 17. The movie deliverance had just come out. Oh
Oh
man, you could hear banjos
Where's
playing
Ned Beatty?
where there were no banjos. It was scary a little bit. And the first night we arrived, he shared his testimony with me. I was really taken. I heard, oh boy, this is going to happen again. I didn't realize that I was carrying around a bag of guilt and condemnation for a life that I had lived, that I knew enough about God that I was not pleasing to him. And I'm singing the Psalms and whatever at the temple in the choir loft, and because most of it was in Hebrew, I'm not being convicted by the word. I have no idea what I'm singing, Adon Olam, Matovu, whatever. Okay, it's pretty. But my lifestyle, I knew, was not pleasing to God. And when he shared his testimony with me of how he had lived and how he had been forgiven, it just cut me. And then hope. Hope began to spring up in me that I could be free from this stuff, including fear and all the rest of it. So I went to sleep with that just for a couple hours, woke up super early, got up and went for a walk along the river that we were supposed to be fishing. I could have cared less about fishing. I just wanted to get to know this guy from West Texas. And as I walked, I started to have the frightening feeling very early in the morning. Sun's just starting to come up. Birds are singing. Beautiful day is about to break, but it's still kind of in between dark and light. I had the scary feeling that someone is watching me. And it didn't take too long when the fear changed to, wait a minute, this is okay. And I remember like it was 10 minutes ago, as I walked along the riverside, watching to see, I'd seen the old movie, The Invisible Man. I was watching to see the bending of the reeds by the side of the river, because now I was convinced someone is walking with me, and it's okay. And after a minute or two of that, I sat down on a sawed-off stump. And this was my prayer of salvation and commitment. I said, Lord, here's my life. Do whatever you want. And I didn't know what else to say. But for some reason, I knew that what I had heard the night before was the truth. And I didn't say Jesus, I didn't say Yeshua, I didn't say please forgive me. I didn't break down in sorrowful. It was just, of course, here's my life. You're Lord. Do whatever you want. And when I stood up, somehow, I knew I was forgiven. I knew I was free. And that was 46 years ago. So.
There's a beautiful song that I'm going to tell you about. It might not be on your radar. Actually, Mark Japinski's son helped produce this album.
Elias.
It was called Korban Chai. Came out in the early thousands. And there's a song on there, Hine Chai, that is your prayer of salvation. And I think that would minister to you.
I'll have to check that out. I just saw him a couple weeks
ago. Did
you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did your music become then your expression of faith after that moment?
Well, music has always, as I said earlier, has always been a deep thing for me, a pursuit, a passion, a way to communicate. You know, some people are great oral communicators, some are great preachers, some are great speakers. For me, the music always did the talking. The music had a way of saying things that I could feel but couldn't seem to get to paper. And so even till this day, I seem to enjoy the songs that others have written more than my own. And I don't know why. Maybe some people just have a gift to be able to infuse things that others feel. And so the music that either has been given to me or that I've borrowed from others has been my prayer life, has been my way of communicating the joy and the freedom that I've experienced. And that's really the passion of my life, to help others experience the same or better freedom, joy, release that I've been given. You know, the scriptures tell us that part of a life in the Spirit is to freely you've received, freely give. And so the songs, the music has always been my way of obeying that command, if you will, with real pleasure. I love seeing people experience God as a result of what He's given to me. It gets me up in the morning.
Yeah. I always think of, you know, there's so many definitions of worship out there. To me, the definition of worship has little to do with music. It's changed lives, changing lives. And I think that the fruit of that in your life has been overwhelmingly evident, that your changed life. You know, when you see a Paul Wilbur, when you experience a Paul Wilbur concert, it's really a worship session. And I think some of the sweetest moments are when you are at one with the Ruach, in that intersection of the people's yearning and God's ministering, and it's just you and the guitar. Those sweet moments that it's just you and the guitar, and you break away from the tracks for a moment and are in that organic moment. I find that to be that moment where the changed life is changing lives. That's
Wow.
me. That's me talking here.
Can I use that?
You can use
so
that.
so beautifully. Wow. I tell people it's like I'm having my time with the Lord now.
Right.
And you're welcome to join in or observe or whatever. One of my friends of many years just said one of the nicest things to me. He said, those times are so transparent. You're very vulnerable. And at first, you know, for a guy that, where's this going? You know?
Yeah.
But I found it really endearing, and I'm grateful for that part that can be exposed without, it's not embarrassing to me, to be able to, Jesus wept. He had friends. There were intimate times of just real fellowship, of heart speaking to heart. And that's my pursuit. Thank you for that. That was really special.
I totally mean it. people can find all kinds of interviews with Paul Wilbur and hear the story of this part of your journey and that part of your journey. I want to hone in on one specific album and answer these questions. Why Messianic music? Why not just absorbed in the church, into the overall Christian music world? Why a more psalmist approach? What were you saying with the album Arise, O Lord? And I'll tell you this little bit also. I was an angsty teen and was saved by, I grew up with Keith Green in the second chapter of Acts, thank God.
Wow, good
But
choice.
in my teens, I was listening to a lot of Christian metal music that was very angry, you know. And yes, it helped save me for certain. But God, at a certain point in my life, said, you need to put that angry music aside. And he put me on a strict diet of Michael Card, Marty Goetz, Arise, O Lord. And I think that there was such an angelic sweetness to that album specifically that ministered to me. So, all of that having been said, what were you saying with Arise, O Lord? Why Messianic music? Why that vein?
Well, why Messianic music is very easy. I couldn't help it. For me, the music that I scribed, wrote, downloaded, however you want to, was an expression of what's going on inside. There are two kinds of writers. There's an experiential writer, which I am, and there is a mechanical, not a negative, but someone you can hand a topic or a text, and 10 minutes later, kind of like AI before AI,
Right.
they'll write you a song. But I'm experiential. So from the very beginning, the very first song I wrote is Psalm 92. And I'm now in a contemporary Christian folk band called Harvest with the West Texas guy who led me to the Lord.
Okay.
And another fellow, Ed Carr, who was also at grad school at the time. And I sat down with my guitar, first couple of days. And instead of something sounding country folk and it is good to praise the Lord from the Psalms, la la la, la 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 la, minor key, and the guys are looking at me like, okay, that's great. Now let's write something that we can all use. And the next one is Psalm 95, key of A minor, come let us sing for joy to the Lord. And they're like, please help us here. So from the
This
very
is not Larry Norman?
yeah, this is, I can see they're talking to each other like, what's wrong with him? He's not normal. So with the band, I'm singing, love is calling, come unto me. Major keys and folk and 3 tenor voices. And it was wonderful. It was angelic. When we started recording with Zondervan, we would go to a studio, multi-track, first rate, and we'd stand in a room around one mic and sing together. It was
That's amazing.
special.
No auto-tune?
We didn't
You mean it was
need it.
actual music?
Amazing. Songs that we had written, well, the guys had written, and occasionally we did one of my songs, but it was minor key, Psalms. It's him,
Yeah.
It's his fault. So kind of in between, after a couple of years, the leader, Jerry Williams, says to me, have you ever heard of the group Lamb? Nope. All I knew about in those days, this is the late 70s, was Jews for Jesus. Liberated Wailing Wall, Trees of the Field will clap their hands, and I'd play for the guy and say, see, now this is good stuff. Minor keys, Psalms, prophets, this is the real stuff. And so Jerry introduced me to Lamb. I started listening. I said, wow, this is my people. I had no idea. I called Sid Roth. Someone handed me a Messianic Vision cassette tape. I wonder if I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
And I saw the phone number on there. I called, and Sid answered the phone. And I told him who I was, what I was doing. He said, you need to come. You need to come to Washington, D.C. and see what's going on. He said, we have a synagogue. I said, no, you don't. He said, yeah, it's called a Messianic synagogue. I said, what is that? He said, we have 3 Torah scrolls. I said to Sid Roth, no, you don't. He said, yeah, and we have a worship team. You need to just come and experience it. So I packed up my family in a borrowed VW Rabbit because it got 80 miles to a gallon on diesel and drove through the night to see Sid Roth, see a service, left there, and said to my wife and my 3-month-old son, Nathan, in the back seat, who cried the entire time, which I took as a sign.
Yeah, right.
And as we pulled away from Beth Messiah Congregation on Rockland Avenue in Rockville, Maryland, in a beat-up old building with maybe 50 people, my famous last words to her were, there is no way God is calling us to this. I've been singing to large audiences, big Baptist churches, conferences, music festivals. You know, this is the end of the Jesus movement years, meeting other Jewish believers. And I said, what was that? 2 months later, we were back in the Rabbit, driving back to Rockville, Maryland, where we stayed for 10 years, where I became the cantor, the worship leader, and that's where I met Mark Chapinski, who had given up music because when he came to the Lord, he gave up that angry rock and roll music, took his guitar and put it in the closet and said, I'll never serve the devil again. And Renee Block, who almost 40, let me think, I don't want to do him a disservice, 25 years my senior, had a big band. He had played saxophone with Harry James and Frankie Carl, on a high level, had his own big band in Los Angeles.
Who also, and I'll interrupt with this little known fact, has a fabulous album that I don't know if you can get called Winds of
the Spirit.
Winds of the Spirit.
Yeah.
I love that album. He's amazing. But anyway, carry on.
And today, he's 97 years old, still plays the paint off the walls, and co-leads with his son, Robert, a Messianic synagogue over there in Los Angeles. But after meeting those 2 guys, incorporated them to our little worship team, we formed a group called Israel's Hope. And as an expression of our love for Yeshua and worship, you know, back in those days, with the rise of contemporary Christian music, Amy Grant and all the rest, second chapter of Acts and blah, 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 the list was endless. You had to make a choice, it seemed. If you went CCM, contemporary Christian music, nothing wrong with it, more performance oriented, some of it crossed over into pop radio, not a lot, but some of it, or worship music. And for what I was feeling and what I knew I was created for was to be a real cantor, which in my opinion was to hear from heaven, absorb what heaven is saying, and then be able to chant it, cant it, sing it, declare it. Prophetic. Not necessarily foretelling the future, but taking the now word of God and making it hearable for the people, for others. So it's not just resounding in you. So for me, that was turning it into a song. And that's where Arise, O Lord came from. The things that I was feeling in a quiet time whether it was Psalm 92 or 95, or Arise, O Lord, the song that the title came from Psalm 3, Lord, how many are my foes? Now arise, O Lord, and deliver me from my foes. You're my glory and the lifter of my head. And all of those came out of, and the songs that Marc wrote, which became standard materials. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and he shall reign. A simple little song, Oh Give Thanks, from Psalm 105. All of these songs that were a part of our quiet times became anthems that were woven together beautifully by a man named John G. Elliott, who I just reconnected with after, when was Arise, O Lord? 1986. So is that 40
almost,
years?
Yeah, almost.
35. It's a long time.
Long time.
And that's where that came from, as did all the other projects.
Sure.
They were expressions of a relationship.
I love it. I want to ask you one final question. I really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation. I've loved this. There was a pioneering spirit that came from a cultural and spiritual revival in the 60s and 70s that birthed what we have today. It went from Hebrew Christianity to Messianic Judaism. It went from the Hebrew Christian Shabbat meal to a Messianic synagogue. It gave us the society, the community that we have today. What would you say to current, younger, and upcoming leaders about that pioneering spirit that they need to grab onto to take us to the next evolutionary step of Messianic Judaism as a community?
There was, back in those days, there was a passion that drove us, and you could hear it in the music. For some, it was a passion to make Jesus Christ known, and that was heard in the CCM stuff. We heard of contemporary artists who would actually go into bars and nightclubs, get up on the platform with their guitar and sing their own songs.
Keith Green did that.
And not be thrown out.
Right.
There was a passion in us in those 70s. We couldn't help ourselves. The music that came out was us. It was, therefore, it was authentically Jewish.
Right.
You couldn't tell us this isn't it's from our own Hebrew scriptures. And it was through a new covenant lens. It was take another look at Psalm 92. Take another look at Isaiah 53. Through the eyes of Yeshua. And take another look at the Torah through the Sermon on the Mount. And so I would say to a new generation, live your passion. What are you passionate about? Because that is going to be what is real. It's going to be what communicates. It's going to be what speaks to other hearts. And it's also going to be what brings a huge sense of satisfaction in a good way to your own life. That voice that is, I have to do this, you have to do this. You know, Yeshua said, I call you friend. Who is a friend? Someone who is loyal and trustworthy, who is there for you and there with you, but someone that you can also, if Yeshua is your friend, then you're going to do what he says. He said, really, if you're going to be my friends if you do what I say. And so for those who are on their way now, early part of your journey, listen to what Yeshua is saying to you and do it. This to me is a simple explanation of worship in spirit and in truth. Hear his voice and do what he says. That to me is a fulfilling life of worship. You'll find your destiny, you'll find your purpose when you hear his voice and you simply obey. That was the driving force for us then. It still is now. And it's a great source of joy for us to now see. After decades of asking each other, my generation asking, where is Joshua? Where is Caleb? What have we done to stifle their voice, to not give them a place? Where are they? And now all of a sudden, here they are. And for us, my generation, again, we are so grateful that we didn't blow it with our children, and now for some of us, even our children's children. The song goes on. Yeah. It's a never-ending song, and we're very grateful.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for this today. Really appreciate you being here. And again, this has been an episode of They Called Him Yeshua with our dear friend and somebody that I admire the most, Paul Wilbur. Thanks.
My pleasure.